So why we are here today?
Racism. So before we get to know MLK, we want you guys to get to know us. So that is us. With a couple of our awards, we're all dolled up, looking nice. But a little bit about me, Kiyoshi, King Kiyoshi, as Keenan refers to me. I come from my whole family has been involved in racial justice, which is everything MLK stood for. So we come from a long line of fighting for what's right. My grandmother was the first Black person to go to her school because back when she went, it was only for white kids, but her family said no more. And she was the first Black lady to go and desegregate an entire school. Yeah, so my grandmother back in Ohio, which is a terrible, terrible state on the East Coast, she was the first to desegregate it. Another grandma of mine ran a kind of bed and breakfast actually during segregation for Black people because it was a safe haven for them. They were allowed to go to the bed and breakfast that my grandma ran, and it was full of entertainers, so like musicians, singers, dancers, actors. They would all stay with her.
They couldn't get a hotel.
Yeah, because they couldn't get a hotel in the segregated city, so they'd stay with my folks, and that kind of led to what I do and who I am, because my entire family has always fought against segregation and racial inequality. So what we did was we just instilled it into ourselves that nobody can ever keep us down. One of the very first people in my family actually was a runaway slave, which I think is really cool to have in my bloodline. So the very first documented Taylor, which is my last name, Kiyoshi Taylor, was a runaway slave. He escaped one of the farms down in Georgia, and he ran up north, and my family has been free ever since. And now I'm doing my part in the community, in our city, to really just kind of educate people on that, to help people learn about my family's history and how that relates to today.
Cool. So I am Afro-Caribbean and German. So that means that when Black people were brought from Africa, it wasn't only to the United States, but it was also to the Caribbean. So my mom was born in Trinidad and Tobago. I have family in Guyana and in Jamaica as well. And there was a lot of slave colonies that were in those countries before they were freed countries. And that's kind of where I trace my lineage back to. In terms of my family being activists and stepping up to educate and make changes, that happens a lot in my family right now. So my younger brother, he plays soccer for his school, which is Yale on the East Coast. And he helps have a lot of conversations about making sure that we stand up for each other. So when different things are said or done that are racist, make sure that they have each other's backs, make sure that we educate on that and why certain things are wrong. Myself, I am mixed. So my dad is white, my mom is Black. And before 1967, they legally weren't allowed to be together to be married. And a big part of why I'm here today is because of this thing called Loving Day, which is June 12th, 1967 was the first day that's celebrated every year. That's when it became legal for different races to be able to get married. Going kind of forward, I started leading marches about 2 years ago, as Kiyoshi actually started leading marches about 7 years ago. Oh my, 8 years ago.
Yeah,
wow,
years.
I didn't know what year it was. I read 2020, 8 years ago. So Kiyoshi's kind of like an OG, if you will, in
I'm
terms
old.
of he is old. He makes noises when he stands up because he has a bad back and knees. I'm not far off. But the point is, we've been doing this for a while, and we're here to educate. We're here to have conversations and be able to stand up.
All right, we'll keep going.
So we're going to take you on a little journey of how we got to today, which is the new logo you see on the right for Justice Vanguard.
So back in 2015, when y'all was probably still in diapers, I started a group called Youth Alliance for Justice, YAJ, YAJ. And the purpose behind that was to lead marches like MLK did, and also to kind of just educate the community and help them learn on certain issues, such as racial inequalities, and just other issues going on in our communities. So that kind of brought us, that existed for about 4 or 5 years, and then that kind of got transformed into Justice Vanguard and the Black Hub, which is Keenan's part.
Yeah, so the Black Hub is something I created. It's supposed to be like the home of everything Black. So that's Black restaurants, Black food, Black designers, Black artists, Black authors. Because when I would go online to search for things, it was very hard to find things that were made, done, designed, created by Black people. So for one example, the glasses I'm wearing right now, these ones, when I made that website, that's where I found them, is by putting that together, finding this brand called Botin and purchasing their glasses. So we each led marches separately, actually, because again, Kiyoshi started years before I did. And he led one in Mountain View, which had 6,000 plus people. And I accidentally went to the wrong place. I went to where the march finished, not the beginning of it. So I walked backwards and saw this huge wall of people close down the whole road marching and chanting together.
El Camino.
Shut down El Camino. And after all the speeches were done and the march was over, I went over to Kiyoshi and I'm like, hey, I'm leading one tomorrow in Los Altos. I would really like you to join. People need to hear your message as well.
And so I was like, oh shoot. Okay, shucks, I'll come.
So what was cool about Kiyoshi's march is it was actually the biggest march that Mountain View has ever had. And then the following day, my march in Los Altos was the biggest march Los Altos had ever had. And we both spoke with that. And following that, along with the teacher from Los Altos High School named Seth Donnelly, who's like a legend to us, pretty much. He's been a huge help and inspiration for us in terms of this whole journey. He brought a bunch of us together from Yaj, from myself, and from people he'd met at other marches to have a conversation about how can we make this not just individual marches, but how can we unify to make this a bigger message to educate people on what's going on and to start making changes. So after kind of a year of that going on, with where marches were, I mean, the stuff you would see on the news where there's tear gas and there's a lot of violence happening, that those marches started to slow down to where, okay, how can we continue this? So that's where we came up with our new logo. And you can tell them a little bit about that.
If you look at our new logo, if you look at the J, you can kind of see there's a bird on top of it. That is the African Sankofa bird. And in Africa, that bird represents education as well as art. So it was very important to us to include that into our new logo as we kind of go forward in our future, because we really want to promote education and art. And what better way to have that than have it be on our logo? So
yeah, we also both do art. Like Kiyoshi does graphic design and photography and videography, and there's probably more. And I do videography and photography, and I like to draw as well. So there's a lot of art that we have been doing in our past before we formed JV that we want to be able to incorporate. There's a lot of connections between liberation and freedom and making changes and art as well. So why we are here today.
Racism. Oh, let's talk about MLK's beginnings. All right. So January 15th, that is tomorrow. Tomorrow is MLK's birthday. He was born in 1929. Oh man, he's getting old too. In Atlanta, Georgia. He was the son and the grandson of a Baptist minister. So he was very heavily involved in the church. He lived in Georgia in a place known on Auburn Ave, otherwise known as Sweet Auburn, otherwise known as Black Wall Street. They called it that because it was a thriving community full of really well-to-do Black-owned businesses, which at that time, there weren't many places like that in this country. So it was really, really dope that he was able to come up in an area with so much Black excellence. In 1944 to 48, he went to Morehouse College, which is his favorite, or which was, he became a minister and got his doctorate in theology there. And then later on, he married Coretta King, which is his wife, and they had 4 kids, and they lived a very happy life while he was alive.
So I got you. So slavery started around 1619 for the United States. Well, obviously for the Americas, I should say, where in Jamestown, a slave ship that was coming from Portugal, or a Portuguese slave ship was taken over, and the people were taken to Jamestown. And that kind of made the transition from it being indentured servants. Indentured servants are people who they would want to go to, like, let's say the Americas, but they couldn't afford to. So they would say, I'm going to work for you for free until I pay off what it costs to get there. But the thing is with that, when they pay that off, they now can go and live on their own. So they saw that with enslaved people, they didn't have to let them go. They could do whatever they wanted to make them work for as long as they needed. So that started to really expand why like slavery took off and why that became such a prevalent thing, such a big thing.
And slaves weren't even counted as a full person. So let's do a quick little math experiment here, right? Because we're going to talk about the 3/5 compromise. Now, the 3/5 compromise is how they made Black people less than a full person. So say you have 5 white people here in one room, and then in the next room, you have 5 Black people. Now, if you were to do a tally today of the 2 rooms, you would say there are 5 people in this room and 5 people in that room, right? 10 in total. But back then, you would not get 10 people. They would have said there were 5 people in the white room, but in the room with 5 Black people, they would say there are only 3. So that's how we get the 3/5 compromise, because only 3 out of 5 Black people would be counted as a full person. And they did that for a variety of reasons in the South, but mainly just so they can kind of fudge the numbers on, polls and stuff like that.
Yeah, for voting rights, for taxation and more stuff like that. So then we kind of go forward towards the Civil War. And the Civil War was taught to many people as being a states' rights. They're just fighting because they want different laws happening in their states, which is true, but is a extreme oversimplification. A big part of what the Civil War ended up being about was abolition, freedom, and no longer having slavery be legal.
So part of it was the northern states versus the southern states. Now, the northern states were anti-slavery. They were called the Union. Now, and the southern states were called the Confederacy. The war mainly took place in the southern states. So when the war was over in, I think, 1865, right?
Yep.
Yeah, 1865, 2.5 million people were dead. But not only that, but the South was left in ruin because they no longer, they were all scarred up from the battles. They no longer had slaves, so they no longer had a source of income. They no longer had money. And then they were also kind of angry that not only did they lose the war, but they lost their main profit, which unfortunately for us was Black people. And if you look at our picture, you can kind of see how recently we've gotten out of the slavery era. So yeah, from 1619 to 1865. So slavery is kind of a very recent thing.
Yeah, like my grandparents were born in the 1920s and 30s. So that's still in that range, in that yellow, where segregation is still very prevalent, where they couldn't use the same bathrooms, same hotels, they couldn't go to the same schools, and they didn't have the same access to anything.
And MLK was in that little yellow era right there. So after slavery happened, there was a thing called the Great Migration, migration, like butterflies, they migrate from north to south. Well, Black people after slavery did the same thing. Only difference is we went from south to north because we wanted better opportunity. We wanted to go explore more jobs. But another thing was we were running away from the south because even though the war is over, people were still very upset that Black people were free. So they went out of their way to harm a lot of Black people and families. So it's called either the Great Migration or the Great Scatter, because people were running away from people doing racist acts and sometimes even killing Black people just because of the color of their skin. So that's why a lot of Black people have now moved to cities like Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, Cleveland,
Oakland,
Los Angeles. But it was a lot of those pockets where you see Black and African Americans are because they were running away from a lot of racism in the South.
that kind of leads us into segregation, which is going to lead us into the civil rights movement. So segregation was a bunch of laws that were put into place that would keep Black people and white people separate. So Black people had to use a different water fountain, a different school, a different part of the bus. And there was many laws that were put into place that, although they were, quote, free, they would still be stuck in these work situations where they couldn't get out of that. So that leads us into the civil rights era.
So MLK was a non-violent individual, which means he always, his famous quote is "turn the other cheek." So that means if someone came up and bullied you and like say they punched you in the arm, he would not punch them back. They punch you in the arm again, still would not punch them back, because what that did was it let everyone around him who saw him being punched in the arm see, hey, the guy punching him in the arm is in the wrong. And here's MLK just being a peaceful person. I'm going to support that. So one of the ways he did a non-violent protest or action was bus boycott. So what a boycott is when you purposely avoid a certain thing. So back in Montgomery, MLK made it so every Black person purposely avoided the buses because he wanted, because back then the buses were segregated. Blacks would have to ride in the back. Maybe you guys have heard of Rosa Parks, who refused to give up her seat on the bus because of the color of her skin. She did that because she didn't think it was right that they could be discriminated on public transit. But back then it was illegal. So in order to make it non-illegal, to make it legal, they did a bus boycott. So they refused to take the bus for 381 days. So over a year, they refused to take the bus.
And they walked everywhere. They'd walk to work. And that's not like walking like a mile down the street, but they're walking miles
5,
every
6,
day,
8 miles every day
in the hot sun often to get to work and to get back in order to not take the bus.
Or the freezing cold and the rain, it didn't matter.
So we get into voting rights. One of the big things that Martin Luther King fought for was the right to vote. So similar thing that's being fought for today, he was fighting for then in terms of allowing people to have the right to vote. So in the South, they had literacy tests, which means that in order for you to get to cast your vote and to vote for who you wanted, they would ask you a whole bunch of really difficult questions.
Now imagine this. If you had to vote and they gave you a book that is written for, a college student, because you guys are second, third, fourth graders, right? Around that era. Imagine if you were given the hardest book in the world and be like, read that, and you guys get a sticker and some popsicles. You're going to look at them like, what? No way. I don't know what that word means yet. Like, heck, I probably still don't know what that word means yet. So how the heck are we supposed to do this? Right? That's what they were doing back in the day to keep Blacks from voting. They were giving them impossible tests. It was like giving them a puzzle with missing pieces.
That's a good one. That's a good way to use.
One of the ways he conveyed this message of this isn't right was he would give speeches to the public. Because as you guys learned earlier, he was a reverend, which their job is to preach, to speak in front of people. So he used to speak in front of thousands and thousands of people, kind of like what me and Keenan do now. And he would talk about, we aren't going to swing back when they swing at us. He would talk about, we deserve the right to vote because we are just as human as you. He would talk about, we we will walk to work if you won't let us ride next to you. So, and you guys, I'm sure will listen to I Have a Dream speech and all of that. But the bare minimum, it was just, let's do what's right. And that was often his message. Let's unite. So his death and legacy. So right before his death, he was becoming increasingly concerned with the economic well-being of America. So that basically just means there's rich people, there's poor people, and there's a lot of poor people. Now, the poor people used to not always get along because some were Black and some were white. But what MLK was doing was he was bringing those people together over one common goal, and that was money. He wanted everyone to have a lot better economic welfare, which means, a lot less people should be poor. And he was doing marches, he was speaking to people about this, and he was making really positive changes in our country. But unfortunately, before his work was done, he was shot in 1968 on his hotel room balcony. But luckily for us, his wife, Coretta, continued his activism, the activism they did together, and continued the civil rights movement in their name. And she even founded the MLK Center for Nonviolent Social Change, which is a program like us at Justice Vanguard. They try to do things that will benefit the community, as well as helping people learn about some of the issues going on back then and today on racism, voting, and segregation.
So that takes us into the formation of the holiday. So the first celebration took place January 20th, 1986. So that's about 18 years? That's about 18 years after he was murdered. And this year, there's an ask from his children who are still alive today that we continue to take action. So we were talking earlier about voting rights and being able to stand up for those and be able to fight so that people are able to vote and be able to make changes.
Yeah, and what people need to understand is that, yes, MLK fought for the right for everyone to be able to vote, and he made major steps in doing so. The job is not done. There's plenty of people in this country who still do not have the right to vote. And unfortunately, a lot of them are still Black and brown people. So it's important that this MLK, this Martin Luther King Day, that we remember that not everyone has the right to vote still, and that this is an issue that is still continuing.
So today's struggle. So Martin Luther King, again, he did a lot of good. He made a lot of positive change, but he didn't solve racism. It still exists. There's still many things that need to be fought for. There's kind of three categories this breaks down into. So there's systemic, which means like policing as a system. That means policy change. So that's voting to change laws and to make improvements. That's the government. And then you have the prison system, which I don't know how many of you have heard of the school to prison pipeline, or just in general, like people call that modern day slavery.
In fact, prisons have the largest collection of Black people since slavery. So that's why it's often referred to as modern day slavery.
The next category is education. That's partly us here talking to you. So when I was with you guys last time, I spoke about how your school is really awesome because you have a lot of resources for getting help, for having extra people to support you, for mental health resources, but that many public schools don't. So public schools are funded by taxes. So like your parents work and they pay taxes and some of that money goes to schools. But not every school gets the same amount of money from that. So they don't have the same opportunity to have what you guys have. Another one is ethnic studies. So this is like a very small window into ethnic studies, but us here having a conversation with you about different people from different backgrounds, so specifically Martin Luther King, is part of that. And Kiyoshi for us heads up our ethnic studies department and is working to implement the first ethnic studies curriculum at our local high schools, which will be going into place next year.
It's a history of race, basically.
That's a good way to put it. And then so opportunity. People who live in different areas don't often have the same opportunities as each other, and people of different backgrounds don't as well. And that comes to things like water, like Flint, Michigan still doesn't have properly drinkable water. Options for getting to go to college. Not everyone's able to afford it, but it's not just because they don't make as much, but there's a lot of things in history and a lot of things in terms of systems that make it difficult for them to get that money to make those changes so that they can afford to go to college.
So here is an image of what my grandmother had to go through when they were trying to desegregate the schools. And below is a picture taken from last year of people being against teaching about race at schools. And we just wanted to show this picture because it's showing that the same things were being said way back then that we consider and teach as racism are still happening today. Now, the words may be a little different, but the message is still the same, unfortunately. But it's not all negative because we are trying to do positive out of it. So even though you still see the racists, saying what they want to say, you also see people like MLK standing up for what is right. So that is a picture of MLK and a lot of his contemporaries, friends. And then in the picture above, that's a picture of a beautiful man on the left. That's me.
And a beautiful man next to him, and that's me, before you say anything. And that's from one of our marches from the last year. But MLK's had a lot of influences in today as well, and specifically for us. We have had altercations with police at some of our events. Actually, this one as well. There were police with riot shields and tear gas at this one. But even when they started to approach us and started to try to become violent,
we turned the other cheek.
We stood there, we stayed peaceful, and we continued to chant our message for equality, for rights, and for accountability.
And love.
Exactly, and love and unity, as you can see on the sign there on the left. We can pass this one. So JV blueprint. So this is kind of how.
This is our org.
Yeah, this is
our little group.
So during one of my first events before it was actually Justice Vanguard, like right in the beginnings, I was getting interviewed in my backyard while we were prepping for one of our events. And one of the things I said was, there's nothing wrong with not knowing, only with not being willing to learn. Because it doesn't matter how old you are, how many things you've learned, how many degrees you might have, you don't know everything. It's impossible. You're always able to learn more things. So as we open our minds up, it's important that, yes, we can educate people on things, but we're also going to learn as well. So as long as we keep our minds open to different perspectives and different ideas, that's the best way to move forward.
And my quote, before we got canceled, was critical thinking is the most important weapon we have, which means put them thinking caps on and really use that brain of yours. Because I know there's a lot of smart people out there and you guys are a handful of them. So when people say something stupid, if they say something racist, you guys, I know, will be right there to be like, no, that's not right. That's not how we do things. And that is not who we are.
So here's two different things that we do out of the many for making progress. So we talked about educating, and one of those ways is not just us speaking, but also having other experts and people who've been doing this in the past. So Emory Douglas is this really awesome guy who was part of the Black Panthers, and he did all of their artwork. So if you see the Black Panther, if you see the different artwork from their newspapers, he's the one that did that. And we partnered with him to talk about the connection between liberation or freedom and artwork and how those tied together. And that was a really awesome thing that we did last year. Another thing that we do together is called Conversations with Your Friendly Neighborhood Black Guys. And that's us. And we have experts onto our YouTube channel, and we do, well, like 1 hour conversations with them about different topics. So a few of them were
philosophers, so people who really like to think, linguistics, which means people who are experts at words, and then just a couple other professors, some people who go to church. We interviewed them, and then of course Black Panthers, a couple of teachers like the ones you guys have, just a whole bunch of different viewpoints and really fun conversations.
So these photos are from one of our first events, which is called Black is Beautiful.
And Kafka.
And one of the things that we find really important is not just to educate on some of the terrible things that have happened through history, but also how strong and beautiful we are as people. So Black is Beautiful, the goal was to do exactly that. So all of these boards were spray painted and hand painted on the grass in my backyard from the people in the community. And when we hosted this event, it was a really beautiful thing where we were allowing people to paint there as well. So connecting art and people's emotions and humanity to be able to show it in this really beautiful way. So this was a really fun event that we did almost 2 years ago now.
And if you guys like doing art, come to one of our events.
Exactly. We'll be having an awesome Juneteenth event. Our one from last year, we'll show you a video right now, actually. I'll go to our website to play it, but I'll show you guys a video of our last Juneteenth. We're doing another one this year. This will be our third Juneteenth, and they're a lot of fun. They're educational.
The first one sucked.
So here,